Not everyone has had any kind of direct or even indirect experience with suicide, but for those who have, it is not only an earth-shaking experience, but you never really can be the same. And this brings such poignancy really to this whole theme in terms of Don Simmonds, Crossroads CEO, because he's had a personal experience with suicide that shook him profoundly and will, I'm sure, remain with him for the rest of his life. Don, it was one of your hockey players. You're a hockey coach, small town Ontario. Tell us the story.
Well, and as a small town guy, you can imagine how important hockey is. I'm actually the coach, along with a wonderful group of volunteers of our high school hockey team. So we only have one high school in our town, so it's special. We've taken, I guess, taken a position that we won't just try and win at hockey, but we'll try and help the young men win at life as well. And so our community, the school, the families, the hockey families, appreciate the fact that we talk about character traits. In fact, we assign a character trait to each player in the year, and it's their responsibility to help the team exhibit that trait. And then we talk about 5 parts of a whole hockey player, not just the skills of hockey, but also their intellectual development, their physical well-being, their relationships, and their inner self. So in a sense, we take a view to hockey that is expansive and broad. As I said yesterday, our motto is to win at hockey, but win in life. So you can imagine when this happened with Dylan, you know, it's such a community failure, a coaching failure. In a sense, it's everything it's everything opposite.
Did you feel it was a personal failure?
I have to say that with that kind of aspiration to help these young men succeed in all of life, to think that the finality of this type of mistake or decision, unlike so many other mistakes that young people make, that we all made, it is, as you said, it's life-altering. I think coming to Crossroads, I knew about the media hold. I wanted to lead us to do better with, making sure we are taking God's message of love into the media. But I don't think anything has crystallized for me the storm that we're really in, like Dylan's death.
Now, tell us about Dylan's death. He was your goalie. He was an outstanding young player, student, participant in the team. How did he take his life, and do you have any idea why?
Well, let me start by saying that our community has lost 13 young people in the last 5 years from the high school, 3 to suicide. Others were traffic accidents, some of them unwise choices with respect to drinking and other things. But it's in Dylan's age group, as a matter of fact, I think there were 5 or 6 peers that were within that 13. So there has been it's been tough for that particular group going through. Dylan joined our team when he was in grade 10. We have a varsity team, which means it's our senior team, so not very many grade 10 players make it. And he was a spectacular athlete. He was a very interesting young man, very poised. Goalies are interesting, as you probably know, and he was very confident in himself and his sport. And I will say that when he had their back, our team played well. And so he was our goalie for 3 years. And so, as I said, you don't live through hockey dressing rooms with 20 young men and not get pretty intimate. And Dylan had his challenges, of course, in life. I interview our kids before they are chosen for the team. And I can remember my interview in grade 10 in the cafeteria. I said to Dylan, Dylan, what's your biggest personal challenge right now? And he said, well, last year I gave my life to God, but I'm having trouble making my life decisions His way. And I believe that was the start of a picture of this dichotomy for Dylan, this tough challenge of living in 2 worlds, where his parents had taught him Christian values and what God can mean, and he'd accepted them. But he wasn't practicing or living out what he knew God would expect from him. And I think that was a very tough context for him as he lived in both worlds. In fact, you know, I've talked about the perfect storm, the storm of diluting values, the storm of failing faith foundations. So diluting values is one thing, but without the foundation to enter such a storm, we leave our kids exposed. Thirdly, the storm of media dominance that just drowns the kids in messages and volume of media. And finally, the storm which we've seen so vividly over the weekend in Amanda's death, the storm of personalizing technology. And actually, when Dylan's dad finally was able to see the messaging on his phone after Dylan's death, it really showed up vividly, the types of worlds our kids are living in, and the challenge for them really, as they get so many messages and they're bombarded and they're trying to live out their identity and who they are. And I guess we feel we don't know the reason, which is one of the haunting parts of suicide, Jim.
Yeah.
Often the reason is unknown, but part of it could be this tough spot that he was in between his belief system and the fact that he wasn't living it out.
We've been talking with Jerry Johnson, the co-author with you of this book, Why They Die, Curing the Death Wish in Our Kids. And part of the discussion so far has been about warning signs. And you mentioned that in the locker room, there's very little that's not known. You know, a bunch of guys putting on smelly equipment. You get to know kids pretty well. Was there any warning sign? Was there any indication that he was in trouble?
Well, I think we've all been, as leaders in the community, we've all been concerned about what's been prevailing around. Yeah. Dylan was very articulate about some of those experiences and strong in some ways about how it would be so wrong as a friend to take one's life. And so I would say yes, we weren't necessarily, I was concerned at some points about Dylan, but not around the time. In fact, you know, he'd been playing hockey with a lot of his buddies that week and with his girlfriend at a Leaf game, and so it didn't appear that there was this going on in his life. And of course, you know, when I think of God's creation, God creating specifically an individual, the uniqueness of each human being, you know, he doesn't aspire for anyone to end what he's created. And one of my worries, of course, is that these diluting values, would you believe, Jim, that in our society today, 15% of people think suicide is an acceptable moral decision? And I actually believe that part of what's happening behind the very subject we're talking about is the door of acceptability. And so it doesn't have to open very much, because we've talked about the fact that suicide is not an everyday tendency necessarily. It's really a moment in time out of a depressed or a feeling of hopelessness, just a moment in time. But if at that moment in time we've opened the door just ajar instead of closing it shut on that option, I think that's one of the prevailing things that are affecting our young people, as that's talked about online and almost encouraged in a funny sort of a way.
What, you know, we hear and we see on television coaches before the game, after the game, speaking to the team about a victory or a loss. What did you have for your team after Dylan died? Well,
as a matter of fact, we were in the middle of a tournament when Dylan's funeral occurred. And it was difficult because we, in a sense, would have loved to cancel the tournament. But Dylan himself wouldn't have wanted us not to play on. So we actually forfeited a game and we returned to the funeral as a team. And a high percentage of our past alumni came to the funeral, to the visitation and so forth. They wore their Tigers jerseys. We formed an honor guard in honor of a lost team member. One of the things we don't want to do is celebrate the decision that a young person makes to end their life. And our town's very concerned about that. And I spoke very strongly about that during the eulogy at Dylan's funeral. At no time do we want to encourage this as an acceptable or positive option. On the other hand, we wanted to honor a missing teammate. And so through that process, the fact that we were actually away with our team on a bus and together, I would say was an excellent way for us to help process this very, very difficult experience for us as a team and of course as a community, and for Dylan's family and their extended friends and network. And Jim, I'm not sure it's something one can say ever gets fully dealt with.
Well, you know, you get a sense, friends, don't you, listening to Don Simmonds speak about the very depth of feeling he has for this situation. And you know, that's the case with Crossroads right across the board. David Maines began this ministry because of his heart of compassion for people in his community as a pastor. And for over 50 years now, Crossroads has had this depth of empathy and concern for those of you who are going through real dark nights of the soul. And we hope that you will understand that. And as you write in, call in, log on for Why They Die, Curing the Death Wish in Our Kids, understand that this comes heart to heart.